She thought humiliating him in public would put him in his place, but the neighborhood was stunned when the same man she spat on walked into the HOA meeting as their newly elected president. "Who do you think you are, standing here like you own the place?" The words came sharp, thrown across the community pool parking lot in Raleigh, North Carolina. On that humid Saturday afternoon, the air was thick with chlorine and cut grass, but what everyone remembered wasn't the heat. It was what happened next. Calvin Dunmore, a 44-year-old financial advisor, stood near his black SUV with a clipboard in his hand. He'd been going over landscaping estimates with a contractor when the interruption hit him like a slap. Turning slowly, Calvin saw her. Denise Rowland, the woman neighbors already knew as the self-appointed watchdog of the neighborhood. She marched across the lot, sandals clapping, jaw tight. Several residents paused mid-conversation at the poolside tables, watching the scene build. "I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" Calvin asked, measured but firm. He had that calm tone that came from years of client meetings where patience often won the day. "You don't belong here," Denise snapped. "This lot is for members only, not for strangers bringing in God knows what contractors." The contractor, a stocky man in a Carolina Panthers cap, looked down at his notes, suddenly fascinated by the numbers on the page. Calvin exhaled. "Ma'am, I live here. Just moved into the house on Hawthorne Circle with my wife and kids." "That's not what I heard." She shot back, narrowing her eyes. "People say you're renting, and renters don't have the same privileges as owners. So move your car before I call security." A small crowd had gathered by then, kids in dripping swimsuits clutching towels, parents holding sodas, teens recording with their phones. Calvin's patience wavered. He glanced at the faces staring, the phones tilted up like hungry eyes. "Look," he said, still keeping his voice low. "I'm not looking for trouble. I'm reviewing landscaping plans for my property." "That's it." Denise stepped closer. Too close. She jabbed a finger toward his chest. "Don't you dare talk down to me!" "I've lived here for 18 years. I know who belongs, and you don't—" "Please back up," Calvin replied, steady but firm. "You're in my space." The tension reached a breaking point. Denise's cheeks flushed red, her breathing quickened, and in a move that froze everyone for a split second, she spat. Right at him. Gasps broke out. The contractor stumbled back. A teenager whispered, "Oh my God, I got that on video." Calvin stood still, his shirt damp where the spit had landed. For a moment, silence blanketed the scene, broken only by the splash of a kid diving into the pool behind them. "Are you serious right now?" Calvin's voice rose, sharp and raw. "You spit on me! In front of all these people." Denise folded her arms, defiant. "I did what I had to do. People like you think you can walk in and change everything. Not here," murmurs spread through the crowd. A man in a red polo muttered, "She's gone too far this time." A woman shook her head, whispering, "Someone needs to stop her." Calvin wiped his shirt with the edge of a towel a neighbor tossed him. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the insult that clung heavier than the spit itself. He locked eyes with Denise. "You don't know me, but you're about to." The words carried, and every person standing there knew this wasn't just another neighborhood spat. It was something bigger, something that would ripple through every backyard barbecue, every HOA meeting, every group chat. But no one, not even Denise herself, could have predicted the twist waiting just days away. But to understand why this moment became the turning point for the entire neighborhood, we need to step back and see how Calvin even ended up here in the first place. 2 weeks before that ugly Saturday afternoon, the Dunmore family had pulled into their new driveway on Hawthorne Circle with a U-Haul trailer stacked high. The move to Raleigh wasn't a whim. It was the promise of a calmer chapter. For Calvin, the decision came after years of grinding hours at a financial firm in Charlotte. His wife, Monica Dunmore, a middle school counselor, had been gently nudging him for years to find a neighborhood where their children could roam freely without constant traffic roaring by. Their son, Tyrese, 12, wanted a basketball hoop in the driveway. Their daughter, Alana, 9, wanted sidewalks safe enough to ride her pink bike without hearing her mom yell, "Slow down," every few minutes. Hawthorne Circle offered all of that. The streets curved lazily around well-kept lawns, the trees provided summer shade, and the gated entrance gave Monica peace of mind. On paper, it was everything they had asked for. Neighbors peeked through curtains that morning as movers carried box after box inside. Some waved politely. Others watched quietly, holding their distance. Calvin noticed it, even if no one said a word. He carried a box labeled kitchen into the house and muttered under his breath, "Guess the welcoming committee took the day off." Later that afternoon, while unpacking dishes, Monica spotted a woman standing across the street, arms folded, gaze fixed on their house. She was tall, with streaks of grey through her auburn hair and a stiff posture that radiated judgment. "Who's that?" Monica whispered. Calvin stepped beside her at the window. "No idea. Probably one of the neighbors sizing us up." They both laughed it off, but the truth lingered. Moving meant new beginnings, yet it also meant entering a space with its own unspoken rules, invisible hierarchies, and people like the woman across the street. People who decided early on whether you belonged or not. The kids adjusted quickly. Tyrese found a group of boys his age who played basketball at the community park. Alana befriended a girl down the street with a trampoline. For them, it felt like a summer dream. For Calvin and Monica, it was more complicated. The HOA board had already reached out with a welcome packet, a list of community rules, and a polite reminder about monthly dues. Calvin, organized as always, had reviewed every line. He was used to numbers, contracts, and fine print. But what he didn't expect was how much personal politics lived behind those papers. One evening, as the family ate pizza on unpacked boxes serving as a makeshift table, Calvin mentioned it. "It's strange. The board seemed overly eager when they called me. Asked a lot of questions about my background. Finance, planning, management, things like that." Monica sipped her soda. "Well, that's your world. You've been in finance for 20 years. Maybe they want to rope you into something." Calvin chuckled. "Wouldn't be the first time. But let's just get settled before I think about community projects." Outside, the hum of crickets filled the night. From across the street, that same woman, later he'd learn her name was Denise Rowland, stood near her mailbox, phone in hand, staring long enough to make Monica shift in her seat. "She's watching again," Monica whispered. Calvin turned and caught her eye. For a second, neither moved. Then Denise raised her phone like she was scrolling, pretending she hadn't been staring. He leaned back in his chair. "Something tells me that's the neighborhood referee," Monica frowned. Well, she better keep her whistle to herself. The next morning, Calvin jogged around the neighborhood before sunrise. He liked routine. Running cleared his head, and he wanted to map out the streets. As he rounded a corner near the pool, he saw Denise again, walking her dog. She didn't wave. She didn't even nod. She simply tugged her golden retriever closer, crossing to the other side of the road. Back at the house, Calvin laughed about it with Monica. "I think I've been silently disqualified from her list of acceptable neighbors." Monica shrugged. "Let her stare." We didn't move here for her. But as much as they tried to brush it off, Denise's presence grew larger in subtle ways. She left flyers tucked into their mailbox about parking violations when Calvin's brother stopped by with his truck. She sent emails to the HOA board questioning whether Calvin had submitted his landscaping plans yet, even though he'd just moved in. It was clear she was watching closely, ready to pounce. And Calvin, patient by nature, tried not to bite. But patience has limits. But the thing about people like Denise is they don't just stop at watching. They push, and eventually they cross a line you can't ignore. Long before the Dunmores arrived, Denise Rowland's reputation had already taken root in the neighborhood. People whispered her name in the same tone you'd use to describe a storm cloud that never quite left the sky. She wasn't an official board member, but you wouldn't know it by the way she patrolled the streets, clipboard in hand, jotting down license plates and noting whose trash cans weren't pulled in by 6 p.m. sharp. At community gatherings, barbecues, pool parties, the annual 4th of July cookout, she made her presence known. "That's not regulation," she'd mutter if someone set up a tent too close to the playground. "You know the bylaws," she'd remind families when kids splashed too loudly at the pool. The HOA technically had a set of rules, but Denise acted as if she'd personally written them in stone. Neighbors had their stories. "I once got a warning email," said Mark Langley, a father of 3. Because my son left his basketball hoop out overnight. Denise sent pictures to the board. She called animal control on me, sighed Brenda Scott, shaking her head. Because my cat sat on her lawn. A cat. For 10 minutes, even those who tried to befriend her found themselves burned. One woman, Patricia Gomez, invited Denise over for coffee to smooth things over after a minor fence dispute. Midway through, Denise complained that Patricia's curtains were too sheer for a family community and suggested she replace them. That was the last invitation. Yet despite all the muttering, no one ever directly confronted Denise. Maybe it was her age, mid-50s, with a posture that carried authority, or maybe it was the fear of being her next target. Still, Denise lived in her fortress of rules and suspicions, believing she was the backbone of the neighborhood. When Calvin and Monica moved in, it was almost inevitable that their arrival would land under her microscope. They were new, and new always meant scrutiny. But there was more to Denise's behavior than nosiness. She thrived on control. The HOA meetings became her stage. She didn't hold an official title, yet she showed up early, sitting in the front row, hand raised before questions were even asked. One resident remembered a moment vividly. At a meeting discussing whether residents could install solar panels, Denise interrupted the chair, snapping, "That's not aesthetically compatible with community standards." She'd repeated the phrase 3 times, as if saying it louder would make it law. The motion was tabled, partly because no one wanted to prolong the argument. Behind closed doors, people rolled their eyes. In group chats, neighbors shared memes about Denise the enforcer. But out in public, most smiled politely, waved, and complied. That balance of fear and tolerance is what made her spit at Calvin so shocking. Even for those who disliked her, Denise had always stopped short of something that raw, that public. Calvin still knew, hadn't fully understood what he was up against. But Monica had picked up on it. She saw how neighbors crossed the street when Denise approached. She noticed the way voices dropped when she walked into the pool area, and she recognized the type. People who confused authority with control, rules with power. One Thursday evening, Monica asked Calvin straight out, "What's your read on her?" He leaned back on the couch, arms crossed. "Denise?" "Yes. The woman is circling us like a hawk. And she's not subtle," Calvin chuckled softly. "She's got a reputation, doesn't she?" Monica frowned. "From what the neighbors hinted, yes. They're polite to her face, but I think she's worn everyone down." Calvin paused. "People like that only get away with it because no one stands firm. The second you push back, they lose that grip." Monica gave him a look. "So, what's your plan? Because I have a feeling she's not done with us." He smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I don't plan on bowing to her. Let's just say if she keeps pushing, she'll find out I don't rattle easily." It was a quiet statement, but there was weight behind it. And in the days leading up to the pool incident, Denise made sure to test those boundaries. A flyer tucked under their doormat about lawn edging. An email forwarded from the HOA secretary, asking if Calvin had registered his contractor. A curt note about guests parking overnight. She was building a case, brick by brick, as though preparing for a trial. Calvin felt it, but he didn't flinch. But when Denise finally confronted him face to face by the pool, her reputation collided with someone who refused to bend, and the result shocked everyone. The Saturday of the incident had started off ordinary enough for the Dunmores. Calvin woke early, jogged a few laps around the community trail, and came back to a kitchen filled with the smell of Monica's pancakes. The kids argued playfully over who got the biggest slice of bacon, and for a brief moment, everything felt easy. But Calvin had a contractor appointment later that morning, and he was particular about staying on schedule. Landscaping wasn't cheap, and he wanted every detail right before signing off. The contractor, Raymond Ortiz, had been recommended by a colleague, and they'd agreed to meet by the pool parking lot where there was space to spread out sketches. By mid-morning, the sun was already high, pressing down with heavy heat. Families carried towels, sunscreen, and snacks toward the pool, kids running ahead excitedly. Calvin leaned against his SUV, clipboard in hand, while Raymond flipped through papers. "All right," Raymond said, tapping the sketch. If we trim these hedges and add a retaining wall here, it'll keep the soil from washing into the driveway. We can also do a stone border. Gives it a clean look. Calvin nodded. I like the idea. What's the timeline? 6 weeks, give or take. Depends on supplies. They spoke easily, unaware that eyes were already on them. Denise had spotted Calvin's car when she returned from her morning errands. She slowed her walk, lips pressed tight, watching as Raymond handed over a thick folder. To her, it wasn't a business conversation. It was a violation. She crossed the lot with quick, deliberate steps, sandals slapping against the pavement. Several people near the pool noticed her beeline toward Calvin and whispered quietly. "Excuse me," Denise barked, cutting into their discussion. Calvin looked up, startled by the volume. "Yes? This parking lot is for pool members only. Contractors aren't allowed to set up shop here. Who told you this was acceptable?" Raymond shifted uneasily, clutching his folder. "Ma'am, we're just reviewing some designs. I'll be gone in 10 minutes. "That's not the point," Denise shot back, eyes locked on Calvin. "You think you can just bring strangers in here, park wherever you want, and pretend you belong? Not on my watch." Calvin straightened, his calm composure still intact. "I live here. Hawthorne Circle. My family moved in last week." Her eyes narrowed. "That's not what I've heard. Someone told me you're renting. Renters don't get the same privileges as owners." Calvin's jaw tightened. He hated rumors, and he hated being accused of things even more. "We bought the house, Denise. We're not renting. And even if we were, my contractor isn't breaking any rules." Her face flushed red. She took a step closer, her voice sharp. "Don't talk to me like I don't know the rules. I've lived here 18 years. I keep this place in order because no one else will." Calvin didn't back away, but he kept his voice even. "With all due respect, you don't make the rules, and you don't get to decide who belongs here." By now, a small circle of neighbors had gathered. Kids clutched towels, parents held cold drinks, and phones were quietly raised to record. The tension was magnetic, pulling everyone's attention. Denise's breathing grew fast and shallow, her hands balled into fists. "People like you come in here and think you can change everything." "Well, not me. I won't let it happen." Calvin took a slow step forward, not aggressive, but deliberate. "People like me? What exactly does that mean, Denise?" She faltered, words tumbling but never landing. Instead, in a sudden burst of anger, she spat. The spit hit Calvin's chest, sliding onto his shirt. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. One teenager whispered, "I got that on video." Another parent muttered, "She's lost her mind." Raymond recoiled, clutching his folder tight against his chest. "Sir, do you want me to call someone?" Calvin's voice rang out, louder than before. "You just spit on me? In front of everyone? Are you serious?" Denise crossed her arms, defiant. "I did what I had to do. You don't belong here, and you never will." The silence that followed felt heavier than the summer heat. Every eye was on Calvin, waiting for his reaction. He wiped his shirt with the towel someone handed him, his hands trembling not from fear, but from the weight of the insult. Finally, he looked directly at Denise, his voice steady but cutting. "You don't know me, but you're about to." The words hung in the air, echoing across the lot. Neighbors exchanged glances, some wide-eyed, others shaking their heads. Whatever just happened wasn't going to fade away. It was going to stick. Raymond lowered his voice. "Mr. Dunmore, maybe we should finish this another day." Calvin nodded without breaking eye contact with Denise. "Yeah, we'll reschedule Raymond backed away quickly, leaving Calvin and Denise in the center of the circle of witnesses. Someone whispered, "This is going straight to the board." By sundown that Saturday, the pool parking lot confrontation was already the only topic of conversation in the neighborhood. The video had traveled faster than anyone could have imagined. Teenagers sent it through Snapchat within minutes, parents shared it in their group chats, and by evening, it was floating around on the neighborhood Facebook page with comments piling up underneath. "Did anyone else see this?" One post read, paired with the grainy clip of Denise spitting at Calvin. Within an hour, there were over 100 reactions, angry emojis, shocked faces, and more than a few neighbors chiming in with their own stories about Denise. "She's harassed me for years," one resident wrote. "Now everyone can see what we've dealt with." "I told y'all she was out of control," another added. "This is crossing the line." It wasn't just online. The following morning, Monica walked out to grab the newspaper and was met by Brenda Scott from down the street. Brenda leaned in, her voice low, as though sharing a family secret. "Girl, I saw that video. I don't know how you kept your cool. Denise has been a problem since I moved here. You tell your husband he handled that better than most of us would have." Monica managed a small smile. "He was angry. We all were. But he's not the type to explode in public." Brenda nodded. "Well, she finally showed her true colors. Nobody can deny it now." Inside, Calvin sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. His phone buzzed non-stop with texts from co-workers, friends, even his cousin in Charlotte. Some messages carried sympathy. Others were blunt. "Man, I'd have pressed charges. You should sue her for assault." "She picked the wrong one this time." Calvin rubbed his temples. He wasn't a man who sought conflict, but being spat on crossed a line he couldn't ignore. Monica sat across from him, her eyes tired but sharp. "So, what's the plan?" she asked. "I already reported it to the HOA," Calvin said. "Filed a formal complaint. I'm not letting this slide." Monica leaned forward. "Good. She's gotten away with too much for too long." The kids picked up on the tension too. Tyrese asked quietly, "Dad, why did that lady hate us so much?" Calvin pulled him close, lowering his voice. "Some people are scared of change. Some people feel like they need to control everything. But what she did says more about her than it does about us." The boy nodded, though the confusion lingered in his eyes. That weekend, whispers followed Calvin everywhere he went in the neighborhood. At the mailbox, 2 men waved and said, "Saw the video, man." "Sorry you had to go through that." At the grocery store, a woman from the community stopped him in the aisle. "Thank you for keeping calm." If that had been me, I don't know if I could have, but not everyone was sympathetic. A few comments online hinted at division. Maybe she just lost her temper. Calvin's making a big deal out of nothing. People spit all the time. It's not that deep. Calvin scrolled through those comments late one night, his jaw tightening. He turned off his phone and muttered, "Easy to dismiss when it didn't happen to you." Meanwhile, Denise stayed quiet. She didn't post, didn't respond, didn't apologize, but she was seen. Neighbors spotted her trimming her hedges, walking her dog, and carrying groceries as though nothing had happened. Some said she smirked when people looked her way, as if daring them to bring it up. Then came the notice. The HOA's monthly meeting scheduled for Tuesday night. Usually those gatherings drew a modest crowd, 10, maybe 12 people. But word spread fast. This time, residents whispered, "You going to the meeting? You know Denise is going to be there." On Monday evening, Calvin received an email from the HOA secretary. It was brief, but telling. "Mr. Dunmore, as you may know, Tuesday's meeting will address several agenda items. Given the circumstances, we encourage you to attend. Calvin read it twice." A small smirk tugging at his lips. He closed the laptop and looked at Monica. "Guess it's time." She raised an eyebrow. "Time for what?" He leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "For Denise to realize this neighborhood isn't hers alone. Things are about to change." The next day, the anticipation grew. Cars pulled into driveways earlier than usual, neighbors dressed a little sharper, and whispers spread from mailbox to mailbox. Everyone knew the fireworks weren't over, and while Denise likely thought she still had the upper hand, she had no idea what was waiting for her. But the real shock came not when the meeting started, but when Denise learned who was sitting at the head of the table. Tuesday evening arrived with the kind of tension you could almost feel hanging in the clubhouse air. Normally, HOA meetings were sleepy affairs, attended by a handful of board members and a few residents who cared enough to debate fence heights or pool hours. But this night was different. Every chair was filled, people leaned against the walls, and the buzz of conversation was louder than the hum of the ceiling fans. Calvin walked in with Monica at his side. He wore a navy blazer, pressed slacks, and the kind of calm expression that made people pay attention without him having to say a word. Neighbors nodded to him, some offering quiet pats on the back. Monica squeezed his hand. "Just be yourself," she whispered. At the front of the room, The long folding table was set up for the board. Stacks of papers, water bottles, and nameplates were neatly arranged. Denise sat in the front row, her posture rigid, arms crossed tightly across her chest. She wore a pale blouse buttoned all the way up, as if dressing formally could shield her from what was about to happen. She didn't glance at Calvin as he entered. Instead, she busied herself whispering to a neighbor, pretending she hadn't seen him. The chatter dimmed when the HOA secretary, a tall man with wire-framed glasses named Jonathan Pierce, stood up. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. We have a full agenda tonight, so let's get started." He shuffled his papers, then smiled faintly. "First, I'd like to introduce our new president, elected earlier this month before officially moving into the neighborhood. Please welcome Mr. Calvin Dunmore." The room shifted. Some gasped, others exchanged wide-eyed looks. All eyes darted toward Calvin, who rose from his chair slowly. He stepped to the table, resting his hands lightly on its edge. Denise's face drained of color. Her lips parted as if she meant to protest, but no sound came out. Calvin cleared his throat. "Thank you, Jonathan. I wasn't planning to start my time as president under these circumstances, but life doesn't always give us clean beginnings. Most of you know me only from what you saw, or what you heard, this past weekend. I'd like to address that before anything else." The room went silent. Even the air felt still. He continued, voice steady. "On Saturday, during what should have been a simple meeting with a contractor, I was confronted in a way that was aggressive, disrespectful, and, frankly, unacceptable. Many of you witnessed it. Many more have seen the video. I won't dwell on the details, but I will say this. No one, in this community or anywhere else, should be spat on or humiliated for simply existing." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Heads nodded, eyes locked on Calvin. Denise shifted in her chair, face flushed. She raised her hand abruptly. "Excuse me. I have a right to respond." Jonathan hesitated but gestured. "Go ahead, Denise." She stood, smoothing her blouse with shaking hands. "Everyone's painting me like some villain, but that's not what happened. I was defending the rules. This man was breaking policy by having his contractor use community space without permission. I overreacted, yes, but I had every right to confront him. The spitting, well, that was a mistake, but you can't act like he's innocent here." A voice from the back cut in. "You spit on him, Denise!" We all saw it. Another chimed in, sharper. "We've all put up with your nitpicking for years. This isn't just about one mistake." Denise's eyes darted nervously across the room. "So, what? You're all against me now? After everything I've done to keep this neighborhood decent?" Calvin let the silence hang for a moment before speaking. "This isn't about sides. It's about respect. Every one of us pays dues, follows the bylaws, and wants to feel at home here. That's the point of a community. What happened to me isn't just my problem. It's a symptom of a bigger issue. Too many people feel policed instead of welcomed." The weight of his words landed. A few residents clapped softly, then louder, until the sound filled the room. Denise's face tightened, her arms folding again as she sat down hard. She muttered under her breath, but no one leaned close enough to catch the words. Jonathan turned back to the agenda, but it was clear the meeting wasn't business as usual. Neighbors glanced at Calvin with newfound respect, whispering to each other about how composed he'd been. For the first time, Denise wasn't the loudest voice in the room. Monica watched from the side, pride shining in her eyes. She knew this wasn't the end of the conflict, but it was a turning point. Calvin hadn't just survived the confrontation, he'd claimed authority in a way Denise couldn't ignore. But as the meeting closed and people filed out, the question on everyone's mind wasn't whether Denise would back down. It was how far she'd go to try to claw back the control she'd just lost. When the meeting ended, people lingered in the parking lot, talking in small clusters. Normally, after an HOA session, everyone made a quick exit, eager to get home. But that night was different. Residents replayed Calvin's calm speech, whispered about Denise's unraveling composure, and speculated on what might come next. Calvin stayed behind, shaking hands, answering questions, introducing himself properly to neighbors who had only known him through rumor or a viral video. Monica stood nearby, smiling politely. her arm linked through his whenever someone else drifted over to speak. Denise, however, didn't rush home. She remained in the shadows near her SUV, arms folded, eyes darting from group to group. The authority she once wielded with raised eyebrows and stern reminders was slipping, and she knew it. Finally, she marched back into the clubhouse, where Calvin was gathering his notes. "We need to talk," she said, her tone clipped. Calvin glanced up, expression calm. "All right, let's talk." The room had mostly emptied out, but a handful of neighbors lingered by the door, sensing something worth watching. Denise planted her hands on the table. "You humiliated me in there. You turned them against me." Calvin leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "No, Denise. You did that yourself." Her nostrils flared. "I've kept this community running smoothly for nearly 2 decades. Before you came along, everyone respected me." "Respect," Calvin said evenly, "isn't fear. It isn't people avoiding you just to keep the peace. Respect is earned through fairness. And from what I've heard, you've built more resentment than loyalty." She shook her head, lips trembling with frustration. "You don't understand. If people don't enforce the rules, everything falls apart. The lawns get messy, the pool becomes unsafe, and property values tank. I've protected this place." Calvin stood slowly, his height casting a quiet shadow across the table. "You spat on me, Denise. In front of children. In front of your neighbors. Do you call that protection?" The words landed hard. A woman by the doorway whispered, "She needed to hear that." Denise's voice cracked for the first time that night. "I made a mistake. But you don't know how this works. They'll turn on you too, just like they've turned on me." Calvin didn't flinch. "Maybe. But if they do, it won't be because I disrespected them. It'll be because we disagree on decisions that matter. That's part of leadership. What happened Saturday wasn't leadership. It was cruelty." For a moment, Denise's face softened, her eyes flickering with something like regret. But it passed quickly, hardened again by pride. "You think you can fix this place?" "Go ahead," she said, her voice brittle. "You'll find out soon enough it's not so simple." She turned to leave, but stopped halfway to the door. "I'll be watching. Don't think for a second you can push me out." Calvin watched her walk away, the sound of her heels echoing against the tile. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. Monica approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You handled that well, better than I would have." Calvin sighed, running a hand across his face. "She's not going to stop. She'll keep pushing, keep looking for a way to prove she's right." Monica squeezed his arm. "Then you keep doing what you did tonight." Calm, steady, firm. People are already seeing the difference. They walked out together into the warm night air. Outside, neighbors waved. Some even clapped lightly as Calvin passed. One man said, "About time someone stood up to her." Another added, "You've got our support, Mr. President." But Calvin didn't bask in the praise. He knew what Denise said was true. Leadership wouldn't be easy. People had short memories, loyalties shifted, and patience wore thin when rules collided with personal lives. Still, he felt something stirring inside him. A quiet conviction. For the first time, he believed moving into this neighborhood might not just be about a fresh start for his family. It might also be about repairing a place that had long been fractured by one woman's grip. Back at their house, Tyrese waited up on the couch, eyes wide. "Dad, did everybody find out she's not in charge anymore?" Calvin smiled gently, sitting beside him. "Not exactly, but people saw that no one person runs this place. That's the difference," Alana, half asleep with her blanket, whispered. "Is the mean lady gone?" Calvin kissed her forehead. "No, sweetheart. But we don't let mean people decide how we live. We treat them with firmness and respect, even when they don't deserve it." Monica watched from the doorway, pride in her eyes. She saw the weight Calvin carried, but also the strength he didn't always recognize in himself. But while the Dunmores went to bed that night with a small sense of victory, Denise's anger didn't fade. It simmered, waiting for another chance to strike. The days after the meeting carried a new rhythm through Hawthorne Circle. It wasn't loud or chaotic, but it was noticeable, like a current running beneath the surface. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact with Calvin now stopped to wave, some even pausing to chat. A few offered baked goods or advice about local contractors, small gestures to show support. Calvin didn't need those gestures to know things were changing, but they reminded him that people were watching, and they appreciated the way he'd handled himself. Monica noticed it too. "You've got their attention now," she said one evening as they sat on the porch. "But attention isn't the same as loyalty. Keep that in mind." She was right. Respect could be fragile. One wrong step, and the same people praising him could turn distant. Calvin wasn't naive about that. His years in finance had taught him that trust was built slowly and lost quickly. Denise, however, wasn't ready to fade into the background. A few days later, she sent an email blast to several neighbors, framing herself as the victim. "Dear residents," it began. "As many of you know, I've dedicated my time to preserving the quality of our neighborhood. Recent events have left me unfairly portrayed. Please remember that rules are the foundation of our community, and I only ever acted to uphold them." Some residents ignored the email, others rolled their eyes, but a small group, mostly retirees who had been her allies for years, rallied behind her. "Denise has always cared about this place," one man muttered at the mailbox. "She just made a mistake." The division was clear. Some were ready for change, others clung to the old order. And Calvin found himself at the center of it. The first true test of his leadership came the following week. A dispute had erupted over whether residents could install taller fences for privacy. Denise had always been firmly against it, citing aesthetics and property uniformity. Now, a young couple wanted to move forward with a 6-foot fence after adopting a large dog. At the next meeting, Calvin opened the floor. The couple spoke first, explaining the safety reasons for their fence. Denise interrupted almost immediately. "That's not within community standards," she said sharply. "We've always capped fences at 4 feet. If you let them go higher, everyone will start doing it. This neighborhood will look like a fortress." Calvin didn't raise his voice. Instead, he leaned forward, his hands folded on the table. "Denise, the bylaws don't prohibit 6-foot fences. They only require approval from the board. That's why we're discussing it tonight." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. For years, Denise's word had been treated like law. To hear Calvin calmly counter her with facts shook that image. The couple added, "We just want our dog to be safe. He's big, but he's gentle. A 4-foot fence isn't enough to keep him from jumping." Denise rolled her eyes. "Then maybe you shouldn't have gotten a dog like that." That comment landed poorly. A neighbor in the back muttered, "That's not your decision to make, Denise." Calvin let the room breathe before responding. "This is exactly why we have a board, to listen, weigh the circumstances, and decide fairly, not to shut people down." He paused, then turned to the couple. "I think your request is reasonable, and I think we should approve it." The vote was taken. 5 in favor, 1 against. The couple smiled with relief. Denise sat stiffly, lips pressed tight, knowing her grip had slipped further. Afterward, as people mingled, several residents approached Calvin. One woman said, "Thank you for hearing them out. Denise never would have." Another added, "It feels like the board actually works now." Calvin listened politely, but he didn't gloat. Back home, he told Monica, "It's not about winning against her. It's about showing them there's a better way to run things." She nodded. "And they're starting to see it." Still, Denise wasn't done. Later that week, she was spotted going door to door, knocking on the homes of her longtime allies, whispering warnings about Calvin's changes. Some doors stayed open, but others closed quickly. Word traveled back to Calvin that she was losing traction. Yet Calvin didn't underestimate her. "People like Denise don't disappear quietly," he told Monica one night. "They double down. And when they realize control is slipping, that's when they get reckless." Monica gave him a knowing look. "So, what's your plan?" He leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Stay steady. Let her unravel on her own. The more she pushes, the clearer it becomes who she really is." And he was right. The more Denise fought, the more isolated she became. The neighborhood was shifting. Not overnight, but steadily. For the first time in years, people felt like they had a voice. But while the balance of power was tilting, Calvin hadn't yet faced the hardest part, confronting what this conflict meant for him and his family on a personal level. Late one night, after the kids had gone to bed and the house had gone quiet, Calvin sat alone in the living room. The glow of the lamp cast long shadows across the floor, and the hum of the refrigerator was the only background noise. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at nothing in particular. For the first time in weeks, the weight of it all settled on him. The move, the confrontation, the sudden role as HOA president, it felt like he'd stepped into a storm he hadn't signed up for. Monica padded in quietly, barefoot in her robe. She leaned against the doorway, watching him for a moment before speaking. "You're thinking too loud again." Calvin smirked, rubbing his temples. "Is it that obvious?" "You've got that look," she said, walking over to sit beside him. "The one where you're solving problems in your head like it's a chessboard." He sighed. "I just keep running it back. What if I'd lost my temper that day? What if I'd yelled back? Or worse?" Monica shook her head. "Then you'd be just another story for Denise to twist. Instead, you showed everyone who you really are. That's why they're standing behind you now." Calvin leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "I didn't move here to fight battles. I wanted peace, a place where the kids could play, where you wouldn't worry every time they rode their bikes. And instead, I've become the face of a neighborhood feud." Monica touched his hand. "Maybe that's exactly why you're here. Maybe this place needed someone who wouldn't bend to her, who could take the hit and still stand tall. Not everyone can do that." He turned to her, his voice softer. "But at what cost? Tyrese asked me why she hates us. How do I explain that to him? How do I tell our kids that sometimes people will target you for no reason other than they feel threatened?" Her eyes softened. "You don't sugarcoat it. You tell them the truth, that not everyone will treat them fairly, but you also show them what strength looks like. You teach them that respect isn't demanded, it's earned. And you've been showing them that every day since we moved here." Calvin fell silent, letting her words sink in. Later, Tyrese wandered out of his room, rubbing his eyes. "Dad, are you still up?" Calvin motioned him over. "Couldn't sleep?" The boy shook his head, climbing onto the couch. "I was just thinking, when that lady spit on you, I wanted to yell at her, but I didn't. I just froze. Was that wrong?" Calvin pulled him close. "No, son. That wasn't wrong. It was smart. You're not supposed to carry battles that aren't yours. You saw something ugly and you felt angry. That means you've got a strong sense of right and wrong. But yelling wouldn't have changed her. What will change things is how we carry ourselves afterward." Tyrese frowned. "So you just let people do bad things?" "Not let them?" Calvin said firmly. "But you don't stoop to their level either. You hold them accountable in the right way. That's the difference." The boy thought for a moment before nodding slowly. "I guess that makes sense." After Tyrese went back to bed, Calvin sat there, staring at the quiet house. He thought about his father, who had worked as a school principal for 30 years. He remembered him saying once, "Leadership is never about the loudest voice in the room. It's about the voice people trust when everything feels messy." Calvin smiled faintly. His father had been right. In the days that followed, he found himself reflecting more often. He thought about the neighbors who had quietly suffered under Denise's grip, too tired or too scared to speak up. He thought about how quickly respect could shift once people saw a different way of doing things. And he thought about his own family, how they were watching every move he made, learning from how he handled each challenge. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Calvin stood in the backyard watching Alana ride her bike in wide circles. She waved, her laughter carrying across the lawn. For a moment, all the stress of HOA politics melted away. Monica stepped outside, leaning against the doorframe. "Worth it?" she asked. Calvin smiled. "Every second." But while reflection gave him clarity, the story wasn't over. The real lesson came when the neighborhood itself began to embrace the change, proving that one act of courage could ripple farther than anyone expected. Weeks passed, and the neighborhood slowly settled into a new rhythm. The pool was still filled with children's laughter on weekends, the hum of lawnmowers still echoed on Saturday mornings, and families still gathered at the park for evening strolls. But beneath all of that, Something had shifted. People no longer lowered their eyes when Denise walked by. Some stopped engaging with her entirely. Others, more polite, offered only a short nod before moving on. The quiet deference she once enjoyed had dissolved. Calvin noticed it during his morning runs. Neighbors he barely knew waved at him now. A few even slowed their cars to roll down the window and say, "Thanks for standing up that night." Or, "You're exactly what this community needed." He never bragged about it at home, but Monica saw the difference. She saw the way his presence carried weight now, not through fear but through respect. At the next HOA meeting, the turnout was larger than ever. And this time, the atmosphere was different, less tense, more hopeful. Residents raised concerns about playground repairs, sidewalk cracks, and security lights. But the conversations were collaborative instead of combative. People were listening to each other. For the first time in years, it felt like the board wasn't a battlefield, but a place to solve problems. Calvin addressed the room near the end of the meeting. His voice was steady, but there was a warmth in it too. "I know the last few weeks have been uncomfortable for many of us. What happened wasn't pretty, and it put a spotlight on issues we'd all tried to ignore. But maybe that's what needed to happen. Maybe this neighborhood had to face its own reflection." He paused, scanning the room. Dozens of eyes stayed locked on him. "This isn't about one argument or one mistake," he continued. "It's about what kind of community we want to be. Do we want to live in a place where people feel watched, judged, and cornered? Or do we want to live in a place where neighbors look out for each other, where kids can play freely, and where we all feel respected?" That's the choice in front of us. And it's a choice we make every day, in small ways and big ones. There was no applause at first, just silence, absorbing, thoughtful silence. Then, one by one, people began to clap. Some stood, others simply nodded in agreement, but the moment was undeniable. Denise was there, sitting in the second row. She didn't clap. Her eyes flicked between the floor and the ceiling as though searching for a way out. But this time, no one turned to her for guidance. No one sought her approval. She was just another neighbor in the crowd, stripped of the authority she had once wielded. After the meeting, Calvin stepped outside into the cool evening air. Monica joined him, sliding her arm through his. "You did good tonight," she said softly. He smiled, gazing at the rows of homes lit by porch lights. We did good, all of us. And in that moment, he realized the lesson was bigger than neighborhood politics. It was about the power of standing firm without losing your dignity, about showing that respect isn't demanded with rules or intimidation. It's built through consistency, fairness, and calm resolve. At home later that night, Tyrese asked, "Dad, did it all finally stop?" Calvin thought about it for a moment before answering. "It doesn't stop, son. People like Denise will always exist. But what matters is how we respond. We don't let anger change who we are. We lead with respect." "That's how we win," Alana, curled up on the couch with her blanket, whispered, "So we're safe now?" Calvin kissed her forehead. "As long as we stick together, we're always safe." The family sat quietly, the weight of the past few weeks slowly lifting. They hadn't just moved into a new neighborhood. They'd changed it. And in doing so, they'd proven that even in the face of hostility, patience and strength could transform fear into respect. That's the story of a man who came to a neighborhood searching for peace, was met with hostility, and instead became a leader his community didn't know it needed. And maybe, just maybe, it's a reminder for all of us. No matter where you live, no matter who tries to tear you down, respect and accountability are what truly builds a community worth belonging to. So if you found meaning in this story, if it made you reflect on your own neighborhood, your own struggles, or even your own family, don't forget to subscribe, because stories like this remind us that while one voice can spark change, it's together that we create the communities we deserve.